Tonight, we're digging into history that refuses to stay buried. Literally, stories once dismissed as legend, exaggeration, or ancient gossip now being cracked open by the cold, quiet gaze of modern science. Before we start, if you enjoy what we do here, drop a like and subscribe. Only if you mean it though. We don't need pity subscribers. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. It never gets old knowing someone in New Zealand is watching this at 2 AM with a bowl of cereal. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan, and let's ease into tonight's rabbit hole. Together, the mystery skeleton under Lincoln Cathedral, the grand Gothic flex where medieval England tried its absolute best to impress god-flying buttresses, stained glass, stonework so dramatic it might have been commissioned by an overachieving theatre kid with a chisel. In the 1960s, archaeologists digging beneath this place unearthed a skeleton. Naturally, everyone assumed monk, because what else is a dead person doing under a medieval cathedral? Yoga? Pause. No, the assumption was monk. Except this one was all wrong. No robes, no sacred trinkets, no arms crossed in that classic holy resignation pose. He looked less like Brother Gregory, and more like a man named Dave who got genuinely lost on the way to Canterbury. He was buried face down with the haphazard energy of someone hidden during a panic, which in medieval England could mean anything, from heresy to sneezing near the bishop. Then science got involved, specifically isotope analysis. Bone-tea reading, essentially. Turns out our mystery man wasn't local at all. He was Scandinavian, which explained the sturdy bones, the worn knees, and what archaeologists diplomatically describe as a diet consistent with Northern European coastal communities, meaning salted fish and questionable bread. This man was a pilgrim. He had walked, yes, walked all the way from Northern Europe, probably hoping for a miracle, or at the very least, a decent relic. He collapsed somewhere near the cathedral, likely from extreme shin splints and a catastrophic lack of nutrition. The clergy buried him beneath the church because they couldn't exactly leave a Scandinavian corpse in the street. Bad optics. But they didn't roll out the full sacred burial honors either. He got a hole and a shrug. For centuries, people assumed he'd done something disgraceful. Turns out he just believed really hard and underestimated the distance. Moral of the story: if you're going to walk across Europe for spiritual reasons, wear a name tag, something like, not a heretic, just devoted. Please bury me properly. Richard III, found under a parking lot. Once upon a time, in the land of dramatic history and famously bad royal haircuts, there lived a king named Richard III. You know him, Shakespeare's hunchbacked villain, the man who shouted, "A horse, a horse, my kingdom for a horse," which, honestly, is the most relatable thing anyone has ever said when they realize modern transportation doesn't exist yet. For centuries, Richard II's remains were missing, vanished, lost somewhere between the Battle of Bosworth Field and someone going, "We'll deal with the body later." Later turned out to mean over 500 years. Enter a parking lot in Leicester, not a crypt, not a castle, not even a suspiciously mossy well. A car park behind a city council building. Apparently, that's where royal dignity goes to rest. In 2012, a team of very determined archaeologists armed with ground-penetrating radar and a level of optimism that honestly deserves its own award decided to dig up said parking lot. Why? Because some medieval records vaguely suggested Richard was buried at a nearby church which had since been demolished, paved over, and rebranded as Parking Bay 7. They found a skeleton. Male, late 30s. Skull caved in from what appeared to be a very serious disagreement with a battlefield. Spine twisted in a way that medieval IKEA assembly couldn't even explain. DNA testing confirmed it not through some grand royal relic, but by swabbing the cheek of a Canadian man who turned out to be Richard's 16th times great-nephew. Imagine finding out you're related to royalty, but only because your ancestor got entombed under asphalt. Richard III is now reburied with full honours in Leicester Cathedral, no longer sharing his eternal rest with oil stains and parking tickets. The mystery of his grave solved. His reputation still complicated. The British tabloid pun potential royally inexhaustible. The Voynich Manuscript, discovered in 1912 by a Polish book dealer named Wilfred Voynich. This mysterious medieval text has baffled historians, cryptographers, linguists, and at least one very determined man in his mother's basement for over a century. Written entirely in an unknown script, it looked like a medieval scholar drank one too many herbal tonics and decided on the spot to invent an alphabet, a plant taxonomy, and possibly an entirely new religion involving naked women in green bathtubs. The manuscript is, and there's no other way to put this, a fever dream on vellum. 240 pages of undecipherable writing, bizarre star charts, plants that botanists describe as definitely not real, and recurring scenes of nude figures floating in what appears to be cosmic soup. It's what you'd get if a herbalist and an alien collaborated on a wellness coloring book. For decades, people assumed it was a hoax. A prank played on some poor medieval nobleman with more gold than sense. Others suggested a lost language, or the diary of an extremely eccentric wizard. Then, recently, drumroll, artificial intelligence and linguistic analysis actually cracked parts of it. Not all of it, obviously. That would be far too satisfying. But enough. Turns out the language may be a form of proto-Romance, an early offshoot of Latin that scholars didn't think had ever been written down. Medieval slang, essentially, like finding law carved into a monastery wall in 1420. Some decoded phrases point to herbal remedies, women's health, and a medieval zodiac. Which means the Voynich Manuscript isn't a map to the Holy Grail or instructions for time travel. It's a 15th century wellness blog. Gwyneth Paltrow. But make it parchment. The real lingering question isn't WH80 it says. It's WHO wrote it, and whether they ever imagined people in 2024 would still be squinting at their bathtub doodles like they held the secrets of the universe. Probably not. But hey, meaningful medieval gibberish is still meaningful. The Green Children of Woolpit. Somewhere in 12th century Suffolk, in a sleepy little village called Woolpit, which sounds like either a charming English hamlet or a very aggressive trap for sheep to children, appeared out of nowhere. No parents, no explanation, no prior announcement. They simply materialized. And they were green. Not metaphorically green. Not new to the job green. Actually, botanically green. Like a salad. Like someone had taken the phrase, "you are what you eat," as a personal challenge. Medieval chroniclers, who never exaggerated, obviously reported that the children spoke no known language, wore strange clothing, and looked like they'd just escaped from a Hieronymus Bosch painting. The villagers tried to feed them bread and beans. The children refused everything except raw beans, because apparently they were both picky and possibly photosynthetic. Eventually, they started eating normal food, and the green faded, because as it turns out being green had less to do with the supernatural and more to do with severe malnutrition. If you subsist on nothing but raw legumes long enough, your body apparently decides to just go full chlorophyll and hope for the best. It happens, especially in England. The church graffiti mystery. Picture a quiet English church. Candles flickering. Latin chants echoing of stone. The priest is mid-sermon, probably warning everyone about eternal damnation or the spiritual dangers of cheese on Fridays. Meanwhile, in the third pew back, one bored peasant teenager is quietly carving a sword fight into the limestone wall for posterity. For centuries, strange markings inside medieval churches baffled everyone. Interlocking circles, daisy wheels, runes and odd symbols scratched into pillars and doorways. Victorian scholars got very excited and decided that obviously medieval people lived in a state of constant demonic terror, carving witch traps and hex wards to confuse evil spirits who, apparently, had failed geometry. Compelling theory. Atmospheric. The kind of thing that sells books. And then the spoil sports arrived. Modern archaeologists, equipped with laser scanners and deeply inconvenient rational explanations, catalogued over 28,000 pieces of medieval graffiti across England. Their conclusion: many of these marks weren't demonic deterrents at all. Some were ships, some were swords, some were cats, some were names: Gerald, 1378, scratched into the wall by a man who, above all else, needed the world to know he had been there. Others were prayers made permanent, requests for protection, commemorations of the dead. And some were probably the medieval equivalent of carving your crush's initials into a school desk. While a few marks do carry a magical bent, the sweeping theory that every scratch doodle was a desperate attempt to trap Satan in a stone loop is, let's say, optimistic. The truth is more human. People were bored. People were faithful. People wanted to leave a mark. So next time you wander through an ancient English church and spot a scratched sword fight, don't panic. It's not supernatural. It's just Gerald. Poor Gerald, who could not sit through another 2-hour homily without expressing himself via blunt instrument on soft limestone. Rungholt, the medieval Atlantis. In the annals of medieval mythology, Rungholt has long been whispered about like a soggy Atlantis, a wealthy city swallowed whole by the North Sea, as divine punishment for its arrogance, its pride, and frankly, its subpar tithing habits. The city reportedly sank in a single night in 1362 during a catastrophic storm known as the Groot Mandrinker, the Great Drowning of Men, which is also what I'd call a North Sea pub crawl that got completely out of hand. For centuries, people debated whether Rungholt even existed. Some believed it was pure fable, the medieval German equivalent of clean your room or the sea will eat your entire town. Legend painted it as decadent and godless. Its residents were wealthy, rude, and reportedly once refused lodging to a wandering priest. God, in classic Old Testament fashion, responded with a flood, because nothing says divine justice like aquatic urban renewal. But then modern archaeologists got involved, using LiDAR scans, sonar mapping, and several very muddy German researchers in galoshes. They confirmed it. Rungholt existed. Harbor walls, drainage systems, dike infrastructure all found beneath the Wadden Sea. It was a thriving port city with advanced water management and extensive trade, and in hindsight, a catastrophic address. Its destruction wasn't purely divine wrath. It was climate. Medieval Europe was warming. Storm surges were rising. Dike maintenance was, let's call it, budget constrained. When the 1362 storm arrived, Rungholt was about as prepared as a sandcastle facing a tsunami. Turns out God didn't sink Rungholt. The sea did. Though if you're looking for a villain, medieval infrastructure funding is right there. The Caynton Caves and the Templar, the Knights Templar, history's favorite combination of holy warriors, secret symbols, and conspiracy theories involving treasure, grails, and very angry French monarchs. So when a cave in Shropshire, England, was discovered containing mysterious carvings, candle niches, and intricately carved pillars with a suspicious lack of wine racks, the internet predictably collapsed into full Templar confirmed mode. Enter the Caynton Caves. A sandstone network beneath a farmer's field that looks like the set of a very low-budget medieval horror film. Narrow passages, low ceilings, shadowy alcoves, the kind of place that, photographed in the right light, practically writes its own Dan Brown chapter. For years, rumors swirled. Templars, secret rituals, forbidden rites. Indiana Jones would have been insufferable about this place. The dramatic lighting alone did half the work. But then the researchers arrived, and the conclusion was rather less exciting than hoped. The cave, most evidence suggests, is 19th century in origin, Victorian era. The Knights Templar were long gone by then, which means the only secret society using this space was likely a group of bored Victorian gentlemen with a flair for the theatrical and too much time between fox hunts. Mysterious rituals did occur there, just not medieval ones. Fringe spiritualist groups used it in the 20th century. Modern pagans have visited, Goths have visited, at least one wedding photographer has visited, presumably for the ambience. So yes, strange things happened in those caves, just not the medieval kind. More that we're all wearing cloaks and chanting for reasons we haven't fully committed to explaining kind. No Templar relics, no inscriptions, no sword stuck in a stone, just vibes, very atmospheric, historically dubious vibes. The princes in that tower, the princes in the tower. A mystery so famous it has its own dedicated genre of historical finger-pointing, and enough suspects to fill a very uncomfortable dinner party. In the summer of 1483, two royal brothers vanished from the Tower of London. Edward v. age 12, Richard of Shrewsbury age 9. Not in the wandered off to find a snackway, more in the likely murdered by someone with a great deal to gain weight, while wearing very expensive doublets. The prime suspect for centuries, Richard III, their uncle, who placed them in the tower for their protection, then mysteriously became king, which is, to put it gently, a suspicious career trajectory. But then there's Henry VII, who defeated Richard, married the prince's sister, and ensured that if anyone asked him many questions, there were no York nephews left to cause trouble. In 1674, workers at the tower unearthed a wooden box beneath a staircase. Inside are small skeletons, child-sized, unaccompanied by any helpful context or even a basic explanatory note. Charles, too never one to overthink things, declared these must be the princes and had them reinterred in Westminster Abbey like misplaced royal luggage. Here's the problem. Those bones have never been definitively identified. No carbon dating, no DNA testing, just royal intuition and a suspicious staircase. Until now, almost. Recent pressure from historians and scientists has pushed for proper DNA testing. In theory, we could finally know whether those bones belong to the York princes or some entirely unrelated medieval children who had the misfortune of being buried under inconvenient architecture. The mystery remains technically unresolved, but the tools are ready. The science exists. The permissions are being handled in a very British fashion, slowly, with great deliberation, and probably a committee. Watch this space.